very good afternoon to you and welcome to the Farm Kenya Show. My name is Noah Kipkemboi and today we have a very interesting topic on matters climate smart agriculture. We understand what's been going on in the world. Climate change has been having its ramifications, especially in the sub-Saharan Africa. We are suffering the consequences of all that. So unpredictable weather patterns. Whereas initially, it was pretty easy for you to plan around the rain seasons. This time round, it's not, business as usual. You find that erratic rain patterns, sometimes when you're expecting rains, they're not there. And when you're not expecting one, they're there. Or sometimes it's in excess with the recent heavy rainfalls that the country has been experiencing in the past month or two or so. It's had its impact on farmers and not so positive in some quarters. So the big question is, in this environment of uncertainty around our climate, what do we need to do? It's all about adaptability. Can we tweak the way we do agriculture to make sure that we are adapting to this unpredictability that is ongoing? And we shall be having that discussion later on with Roussos Demis, founder of Demi Farms. But right now, let's take a look at Agri-News. Now we start off with Martyrs Climate Smart Agriculture Financing. Over 5,000 women and youth from Embu and Kirinyaga counties are set to benefit from climate smart and regenerative agriculture financing. Speaking in Kirinyaga, Rainforest Alliance Country Director Marion Nganga noted that rural women and youth have been left behind due to gender stereotypes and patriarchal nature in developing countries like Kenya, as well as lack of knowledge in technology and digitization.
Close to 2,500 farmers in Embu and Kirinyaga counties with the intention of increasing productivity of our coffee and tea farmers through climate change adaptation, through regenerative agriculture technologies. We are here because we have to adapt or we perish together because climate change is real and we have to change our ways of doing things, so we are happy.
The women often fall behind because they are not incentivized enough to onboard technology and digitization that would help them access affordable and innovative finance through fintechs such as M-Pesa or other MFIs that advance these affordable financial solutions to the larger communities.
Let's talk matters coffee in the country, and coffee farmers from Gishugu in Kirinyaga County are calling on the new KPCU to increase allocations of coffee cherry advanced revolving fund to boost coffee productivity and actually farmer earnings. About 7 billion shillings coffee cherry fund has been rolled out to over 645,000 coffee farmers who are said to benefit nationwide. The fund offers low-interest loans to farmers through coffee cooperative societies without requiring collateral, enabling farmers to meet immediate financial needs like school fees and farm inputs.
Wakati tulikuwa tunaenda kukopa pesa kwa cooperative bank, na cooperative bank walikuwa wanatupatia na percentage iko juu sana, 13% walikuwa wanatukopesa na hiyo, lakini KPCU wamejaribu sana. Hiyo ndio mradi nimeona kwa mkulima wa kahawa, hiyo imefaulu sana juu tunatumiwa pesa direct. Hiyo pesa unatumiwa kwa akaunti yako, ile sako unaenda na kile wanatulipisa ni 3% na inakuanga revolving fund.
We are in Baragwe because Baragwe is the biggest cooperative society in the entire nation. And it has been shortlisted as the gatekeepers of coffee in the region. And this is a start. we are telling our cooperatives, we'll also be, the next tier is to come to other cooperatives. After 2019 regulations, the coffee business have been able to be understood. Farmers are now able to understand how the value chain is operating, something which was not there initially.
Tumepokea miche ya kahawa 30,000 kutoka kwa serikali ya Kenya, na tunaomba serikali itupe miche zaidi ili wakulima wote kutoka pande ya chini mpaka pande ya juu wapande kahawa na wajikimu kimaisha.
What is actually the sector's interconnectivity with engineering, that is agriculture and engineering, which is very, very critical. Engineers are now pushing for a greater role in Kenya's agriculture sector, arguing that technical expertise could actually be the missing link in addressing food security and climate challenges. Speaking in Nairobi, the Institute of Engineers of Kenya say deeper collaboration with government could unlock productivity in one of the country's most critical sectors. Engineers point to mechanization, irrigation systems, and post-harvest technologies as key interventions that could significantly reduce losses and boost yields.
Assistance agriculture to mechanization, which produce a lot and which can be used both as for food security in this country, but what we produce extra we can export. We need also to invest heavily in the space of data, integration of AI and data in agriculture, to make sure that precision agriculture will lead to predictive and being able to predict issues with pests, issues with how climate may change and affect our agriculture.
Climate change is here with us, and we have said that it's affecting much of our agricultural activities, but we are also seeing it from a different perspective, together with, of course, different stakeholders, including the engineers. We want to see how we can engineer the scenarios of climate change so that it can bring favorable environment for our agricultural production.
Now, in line with our discussion today, which is on climate smart agriculture, we head to the Sahel, specifically Burkina Faso, where it is one of the places where climate injustice is actually experienced in real time. What do I mean by this? It is one of the areas, and Africa at large, where we contribute very minimally to, global green gases. But at the same time, on the flip side, rather, we are suffering as some of the biggest consequences of climate change. And this talk about disrupted seasons, water shortages, and rising food insecurity. And activists are now saying that this is an emergency that needs to be addressed. This story is in partnership with Vari.
These climate changes are having a very real impact. This isn't just imagination, it is our lived experience, and we are forced to find ways to be resilient. Another factor that highlights the impact of climate change in the community is the intense heat during dry season. Here in Ogodagu, temperatures can sometimes reach 45 degrees Celsius in the shade. We very quickly became aware of the harmful effects of climate change, which demands civic and community engagement. Our association has embarked on reforestation projects to try to promote ecological mindset. So we carry out reforestation activities in both open and closed spaces. The idea for us is to ensure that people develop the habit of planting trees and looking after them.
Faire en sorte que les populations aient le réflexe de planter des arbres, d'entretenir aussi.
Ce sont des phénomènes qui traversent, qui allègrent.
These are phenomena that bleakly cross from one border to another, and so the biggest polluters have sufficient resources to adapt and to fight back, whilst the least polluting countries face the very same consequences but lack the same resources. And so, it is easily explained Burkina Faso, like other least developed countries, is bearing the brunt of the effects of both pollution and climate change. SPONG applies for funding, raises funds, and deploys its members in a cascade approach on the ground with local communities. It is in this spirit that we launched the quote-unquote Communities Regreen the Sahel program, specifically the CRS program. We set up quite a few programs, and now we provide cascading funding to the umbrella organizations members who support communities in putting their indigenous technologies into practice, such as compost pits, stone ridges, zai pits, half-moon pits, and sometimes combining these technologies.
Comme les fosses fumières, les cordons pierreux, les ailes, les demi-lunes.
Prenons l'exemple du Burkina Faso.
Take the example of Burkina Faso. Although its level of industrialization is low and its carbon emissions are very limited, the country is facing more frequent droughts, urban flooding, decline in soil fertility, and health problems linked to heat and air pollution. That is why we are talking about climate justice today. In other words, those who have contributed most to the problem must also contribute more to the solutions.
C'est-à-dire que ceux qui ont le plus contribué au problème doivent aussi contribuer davantage aux solutions.
Indeed, a clarion call right there on matters climate change on the continent of Africa and how that can be repaired. But even as we talk about the impact of climate change, the reality of the matter is that life moves on. And what do I mean in this context is that demand for food is still there. So there is actually a responsibility to keep on producing. Now, how do you produce in an environment which is changing, where initially you used to rely on rainwater, or as we call it, rain-fed agriculture? You can't do that anymore. How do you adapt in these actually unprecedented times? Rosos Demis is the founder of Demi Farms and a man who's operated in the agricultural scene for a very long time. Rosos, I mean, just looking at that particular item from Burkina Faso, first of all, the global talks around climate change. Africa suffers the most from climate change, yet contributes the least. How are you processing this as somebody who is in agriculture and sees the first-hand impact of climate change? How are you processing this from a global point of view?
Well, thank you so much for having me and having this very beautiful discussion of climate change. So the first thing we have to come into agreement with is climate change is real, and farmers mostly are feeling the impact. And then the second thing we have to now move to is climate change is also a collective effort. It's not something that one person can fight and the other person is not fighting. It's something that we have to work collectively to address. And then that is where you will find issues like climate injustice, like the one we have seen in Burkina Faso happens, because you find there's someone who contribute more to climate change, let's say emitting the greenhouse gases, and there's someone who contribute less, but the effects affect these people almost the same. So in my own view, climate change is real and it needs to be addressed collectively. And if you contribute more, you need to also contribute more in trying to mitigate the effects.
Definitely.
Yes.
And in the spirit of mitigation, especially in the agricultural sector, is coming up with climate smart agricultural ways of doing things. Yes. Just elaborate for us when you talk about climate smart agriculture. In the simplest way, what do we mean?
Climate smart agriculture, in a simple way that the farmers would understand, is simply saying that the weather patterns have changed and we have to adapt to the new patterns that are there. For example, we would say the rainfall patterns, they were very predictive. You know, by April it's raining. By this time, and people would even plan the calendar. That is not happening anymore. You find it can rain early, it can rain late, it can rain more, and so that is why you find even some places they've never flooded before, but now it's flooding. Yes. So a farmer who is in these places need to adjust to these changes, mostly of the weather.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that is very important, that you adaptability, yes, if at all you are to survive.
Yes.
They say survival is for the fittest. So, I mean, you look at Africa, for the longest time, we have relied, and still, many of our farmers who are smallholder farmers do rely on rain-fed agriculture, where it has to rain. And for the longest time, we've had those patterns, and now those patterns are changing. So let's talk about solutions in regards to climate or climate smart agriculture. How are you adapting to these erratic patterns? How should a farmer go about it?
Okay, so ideally that is the whole idea behind climate smart agriculture. We have agreed that climate change is real and it's affecting us. And as a farmer, as farmers, we still need to achieve our core mandate, which is producing food and ensuring that our communities, our countries are food secure. So food security is one of the biggest objectives. Now, the next thing is, how do we achieve this with the challenges of climate that has come? I would maybe give examples that will make our viewers really understand what this climate change is. You'll see in a simpler way without mentioning like hard terms. So one of the effects of climate change is flooding. We have droughts, we have higher temperatures, we have water shortages. Yeah, so there are places that are not dry, but there's shortage of water. So if you're in a place where it's flooding, somebody's in a place which is dry, somebody's in a place where there's no water, then we need now to adapt to these changes. So there are so many ways of adapting to climate change, and it will stem from what kind of challenge are you facing.
Definitely.
Like drought is one effect, flooding is another effect, water shortage is another effect. So I will use those three just to give examples. Like if you find yourself that your area is becoming drier by the day, every time, like every year is becoming more and more dry. And you find, for example, there are certain seeds you've been growing in this place for the longest time. Then it is high time to adjust. Now we have like drought-resistant seeds, you see, drought-resistant seedlings. So you'll find there's, like if I use our country as a context, there are seedlings, let's say fruit seedlings or crops that grows well in dry areas. Let's say cassava, we have millet, we have sorghum. So if you realize that, let's say in the last 10 years, you could grow maize and it could grow. But now if you grow maize, it doesn't grow. Then you have to adapt. Don't insist on growing the maize. Change to what works in your area. So there are things like adapting to climate or drought-resistant crop varieties. If there's drought, water is a resource, so you can also adapt to water conservation systems. Like one, you can adapt drip irrigation. Right now it's raining, you can do water collection. You know, it's very funny, it's raining now. Some people are talking of floods. And then just some months down the line, 1-2 months, people are talking about the drought. The water is gone. But if, like you've realized there's going to be drought, you can collect that water and use it for irrigation. That is one way of trying to adapt. There are other ways like what we call agroforestry. So this is whereby you combine farming and forestry. Like you can grow fruit trees and you can farm also at the same time. So it really helps in the ecosystem. For example, if there's flooding and you have some trees, let's say fruit trees, it helps with erosion and all that kind of things. So that is also one way farmers can adapt. Like, you know, you are changing to this kind of technologies that will just ensure you still produce food and you survive.
Definitely.
The other thing is, which is also coming up so intensely, is use of technology. The technology is really advancing, and you've seen issues to do with the precision agriculture, which now is able to address most of these things.
Okay.
Yes.
And I'm glad you've mentioned the a raft of challenges with climate change. It's not just showcasing itself with one face. So there is the issue of drought, which is very, very, the sub-Sahara and the Horn of Africa has been suffering, I think, some of the worst droughts in history, which is quite unfortunate when you think about it. And yet also in some quarters of this region or the continent, we are also producing so much produce that we are losing a majority of it in post-harvest losses and whatnot. So even those connectivity, like proper infrastructure, they marry into the bigger conversation when it comes to food security. But back to the issue of drought. You touched on technology, and I'm thinking of drought-resistant crops. Seems to be one of the areas that we are seeing a lot of activity in, and I don't know whether it marries into also the bigger conversation about modifying our crops to adapt to the environment that climate change is opening us to. What do you think from a farmer perspective? Is it something that a lot of farmers are embracing, sort of accepting the reality that we are in an unstable environment, and maybe this is an option or a direction that I need to go?
Yeah, that is very true. You know, let's say from time immemorial, there are certain places that have been well known, that this is an arid area, this is a semi-arid area, this is a highland area. But that is a discussion that is now changing, because you'll realize like there's an area that they know this is a semi-arid place, so you will find they're growing those crops that fit that place. And then there's another place that has been having enough rainfall, and let's say for various reasons, let's say one of the causes of climate change is deforestation. So let's say this place was forested, we've done the bad thing, we've done away with the trees, and now nature is now showing us its effects. Then you now realize you cannot plant the crops you used to plant. And so it's not really a narrative of this place used to be like this. It's really sweeping across different areas. And then the best thing that the farmers can do is quickly acknowledge that this is the situation on the ground. And then in mitigating climate change, one of the key factors is adaptability. Adaptability. So once this is like, I cannot grow maize anymore, that does not stop you from farming. Adapt to what grows well in that place. As you also work on reducing this climate change, let's say planting trees and all that kind of things. So that is something that has been there, but then it's also affecting other areas. So the other farmers can just accept the realities on the ground and then adapt what works for them. I think in the industry there are multi-players, like I would say example seed companies. They also notice these challenges, and then you'll find there's a seed specific for this area or that can do well within these conditions.
Okay,
yes.
Definitely.
Yes.
That's very, very important. definitely adaptability is key. We want to take a short break, but when we come back, we expound on some of those practices in terms of technology and what we can do to mitigate and at least continue with this journey towards food security, because the continent is not food secure. This is Farm Kenya Show. We take a short break. Still more to come on matters climate smart agriculture. Stay tuned.
Ukienda kwa barabara utapata samaki inachomwa. Ukienda kwa soko huku inapata samaki inachomwa, kwa sababu upande wa Kirinyaga hapa Kagio wamegundua utamu wa samaki.
All right, welcome back to the Farm Kenya Show. And I mean, in samaki na chomo ukienda mahali, and you ask yourself, I mean, when we talk about climate smart agriculture, even in the aqua sector, because it cuts across. Sometimes when you think agriculture, you're just thinking of plants, but it cuts across all sectors. How has this affected those who are in the aqua space, those who are in the fish, be it sea, lake, or pond? How is climate change impacting them?
Okay, so it's true. Climate change effects are felt in all sides.
Mm-hmm.
And as you've clearly said, agriculture is a multi-sectoral area. So in the aquaculture bit, where there's fish farming and all that, I think two of the major effects they get is one.
Mm-hmm.
One of the effects of climate change is increasing temperatures, the hotter temperatures and the greenhouse gases and all that. And so you realize these are things that grow in water. Mm-hmm. And then that is one of the effects they have, the temperatures, the evaporation and all that. And then the other thing, I think the biggest that affect the industry now comes in terms of pollution. Mm-hmm. So there's water stress, which really affects fish, and the aquaculture sector, and then there's pollution. Mm-hmm. That also affects. Like now, clearly, if you can see, even in the country, there are some rivers that are now running dry. And those rivers, you will find there are certain fish that were growing in those areas, and they are normal. Mm-hmm. There are places maybe we have lakes and the population levels of the fish are depreciating, mm-hmm. and that will clearly reflect in market surely, because you'll find maybe if you are having, let's say you are buying at a certain price, now it's gone up to a certain level.
Yes.
We've also had, on the pollution bit of it, you've also had of, what we call heavy metals, mm-hmm. in like fish. So somebody said this fish is healthy. Most farmers will not really understand when people talk about things like mercury and all that. But in short, those are just things that are caused by pollution. Mm-hmm. So you find you eating fish, but it's not really a very, very healthy fish, because there's a lot of emissions in the air, mm-hmm. and then these all come back to the water. Fish is part of that ecosystem, and then you find it's not really like so healthy.
Mm.
Yes.
I see that. I recently had a very interesting conversation with someone who's in the aqua space, and he was talking about how temperatures are critical. So if at all you put up for example, ponds, you start fish farming, and you put up ponds in a colder space, the growth rate will be a little bit slower compared to in hotter spaces. And they say that's a huge factor to consider. Yeah, sure. And imagine traditionally that consideration has been put. Right now you go to a place thinking it's colder, your fish will take a little bit longer to grow. then it becomes suddenly so hot. So that unpredictability becomes a challenge, and in comes technology, where you can create an environment to control the temperatures and whatnot. So let's touch about or talk about the technology bit as an intervention to climate change, as a way of becoming smarter. Because majority of our farmers are smallholder farmers. So even adaptability to technology, some of these technological interventions are not as accessible to many as we would think. So how do we handle the technology bit? Make sure that it's benefiting the majority of farmers to counter the effects of climate change?
Yeah, it's true. I think one of the most potent tools that we can use to fight climate change is definitely technology. And I think it's really fortunate enough that in Africa, our technology penetration levels are much higher. And that is a really potent tool we can use in fighting climate change. A simple example of a technology that is there is, for example, weather alerts. Like, by this time I'm expecting rains, you can plan your planting calendar, and everything is just on phone. If you look at like our country, the phone penetration is so high, even the local farmers have phones, they have mobile phones. So if they're able to get this kind of updates, it's very critical for them in planning and all that. We'll give an example. These rains that we are facing right now, it came actually 3 weeks before the time we were expecting it. So it like caught many farmers unaware. You've not prepared the land, you've not secured the seeds, you've not secured the fertilizer, and people are running. You know, at first people are like, hey, maybe it's just passing. And then 1 week, it might be serious. Another week, let's get to work. But if you have such kind of information early enough, you're well prepared. So that is one example that we can use. And of course, it can start from a basic level, like just an SMS and all that kind of thing, to a more advanced level. Because if we now go to, let's say, a more advanced level is whereby we have technologies that can even analyze your soil. It tells you this is the kind of fertilizer you should use, this is the amount of water you need to use, and you're able to actually really produce, knowing from the planning phase, because you already know this is what the inputs I need, these probably are the quantities I need, and there are no surprises that, you know, these will just come along the way. So farmers can embrace those kind of technologies, and apart from farmers alone, we also are really appealing to other sectors like engineers, tech companies, to be coming with this kind of technologies that farmers are easily able to embrace and help them. Yes, so that they are able to make informed decisions, because technology can give you the data, and that data will help you to make informed decisions at the right time, in an organized manner.
Definitely.
Yes.
Very, very powerful, because even one of the items we saw in our agri-news segment was the engineers saying that they need a broader participation in matters food security of the country. Because I think for the longest time we've restricted them to buildings.
Yes.
And you're not commenting when a building goes down. But there is more to it, building systems that can hold and spearhead our food security journey as a country. And still on the issue of technology, because climate change really has affected water, which is the powerhouse that the oil that runs our agricultural system. And when, of course, when that is too much, too bad. When it's too little, it's also too bad. And the talk is that we have to innovate within the water, at least environment, as much as we are innovating when it comes to seed, making drought-resistant seeds and whatnot. Let's talk about systems that we can play around when it comes to water, innovate around. I know we've had precision agriculture, which utilizes water precisely as the word suggests. Talk to me about innovation around water management that can help cushion farmers from the effects of climate change.
Yeah, it's really true. Water is life. And in the farming industry, especially the crop department, ideally there is no crop that can really survive without water. So that's a very, very critical factor that we have to take into place. And yes, if it is too much, it's bad. If it's too little, it's also bad. And the biggest pain we are having now is it's too little. Yeah, so and that is what now we have to work towards. Like now we have less water, we have, and the water security is also going down.
Yes.
So farmers also, there's a diverse ways farmers can really conserve and utilize water. Like one of the most common and eminent that farmers are already doing is what we call drip irrigation. Yeah, so farmers, you can do drip irrigations from a very basic setup to more advanced. They are very more advanced where the ones that are using precision agriculture with sensors and, you know, all that kind. But you can start from the basic drip irrigation. So instead of just throwing water in the farm, you know, like we've been having those we call them rain guns, sprinklers. So you can imagine it just sprays the whole farm, but then that same water you can channel it and to the plant directly because the drip tape has those points. So that is also one way of conserving water. And then there are other ways, even if we don't really focus on like the technology bit of it, there are still some natural ways, like simple thing like mulching. You just prevent water evaporation. So you do some mulching. This is something a farmer can do and still conserve the water. Agroforestry that we really talked about. You can plant trees. These trees will provide shade and they also prevent excessive evaporation. And at some point, it also acts as windbreak to the crops. And then the other thing would also be maybe embracing things like cover crops. You know, you've planted whatever you planted, but then you've done cover crops, so you find that the evaporation goes down. So it's a way of trying to both using technology and using the most, I would say, traditional ways still to achieve that kind of water shortage.
Definitely.
And if there is excess, then you can conserve.
Okay.
You can collect, store, and use.
Do you think cost has been a huge barrier to a lot of farmers, especially smallholder farmers, taking advantage of these technologies that have been availed? So, for example, when it comes to water storage, irrigation systems, has that been a huge barrier to entry? So farmers, maybe they want to, but they can't afford.
That is exactly true, because all these technologies, they come at a cost. And this is what always translates to what we call adaptation of these technologies, because we might have very good technologies, very disruptive technologies, but then if there's barrier of entry, or like this technology is good and nobody's using it, then the impact is not what we expect. So that is very true. Like, I'll give you a simple example, drip irrigation. If you're doing roughly an acre of drip irrigation, you'll be talking about maybe 150 to maybe 200, depending on the number of lines. It's 2 lines, 3 lines, 4 lines. And you can imagine like how many farmers, especially in the grassroots level, are able to afford 150,000 just to install the drip irrigation.
Yes.
It's very little. And then when we talk of storage, like right now it's raining. The best thing you can do is you can do a dam, or you can do a water reservoir. To make that, you need a dam liner. If we give an example of a 0.5 mm, which I think is the smallest size now, it's going at almost 180, 200 shillings per square meter. So imagine if you want to do even 50 square meters, it runs into maybe hundreds of thousands. And so many people, somebody might have the space to collect the water, but they don't have the financial capability to buy these things that are needed. So at the end of the day, it's just a sorry state of affairs, and they just watch. And this is where now other players, let's say like the government, can also come in strongly in supporting these kind of farmers, and you know, getting and accessing this kind of technologies through collective effort.
Definitely.
Yes.
That is true, because as you've said, we need to de-risk smallholder farmers, and one of the ways, or one of the benefits rather, to this is that even access to finance. If you have a small operation, it becomes very easy for you to say, you can help me put drip here, and since we have systems that work, I'll recoup this money and be able to pay. So there is a very holistic approach to it. But another area that is very critical when it comes to, even when you talk about sustainable agriculture at large, and climate smart agriculture, is taking care of the soil. Earlier on, you touched on how technology can be used even in soil testing. And soil testing is one of the anthems that we sing on this show. Like farmers, you need to do a soil test to be able to understand what is in your soil, what is lacking in your soil. It helps you make better decisions as a farmer. But as climate changes, people are opting even for different mediums. Talk to me about how this sector is growing so fast that very soon people will start growing food on air.
Yeah, it is true. Back on, because these challenges that we've faced, and one of the effects of climate change, as we've said, is water stress, water scarcity, and the water is going down by day. And so the core mandate is also to produce food and adapt. So there are also technologies specifically to water that are really coming up. You see, like now there are hydroponic farms, there are aquaponic farms, there are even aero farms that are coming that is much, much more advanced. And these are technologies that are really disrupting the industries. If you look at in a global kind of scale, there are countries that are really now producing, heavily depending on technology. One of the biggest motivation, I think, globally has always been Israel, because this is a desert. But in terms of technology, I think they're the most advanced currently in the world. And in terms of production, they're also producing food. A small country can produce and export food, and it's a desert. So the other day we were having a discussion with one of the farmers, and I was saying, Ukambani is gold if only you get water. Then I told him that, you see, if you go to other places, you will not even say Ukambani is dry. Because if somebody can turn a desert into a production powerhouse through technology, so there are technologies like hydroponics. So this is where you don't use soil to grow the crops. So you use what we call a growing medium, and then and water. And then this water has nutrients, and the crops grows in that. And that saves a lot of things. Like it saves the water, it also saves space. But for space, Africa is not even a point of discussion, because I think we have the biggest arable land in the whole world, that actually Africa will soon become the the production house of the world.
Okay.
So the space has never been a big challenge unless it is in towns or in cities whereby, you know, somebody wants to produce. There are technologies like microgreens, you know, growing crops still with water, microgreens, and you use lights. There are special grow lights. So somebody has their spare bedrooms, they install the shelves, they install the lights, and they start growing. And then they sell as microgreens. So these are technologies that are really, really coming up because of the water, mainly the water, you know, aspect. People are trying to overcome this water kind of challenge.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as we near the end of this conversation, it's very easy to point out some of these interventions. But even more critical is being able to see where we are heading, okay? Because the ramifications of climate change are going nowhere. And as a country, as a continent, we need to make key interventions to make sure that we are changing this narrative, which, at least from a technical standpoint, we've discussed in the course of this show. But if at all you are given all the powers in the world right now, especially looking at areas of influence, what do you think are the low-hanging fruit, be it in the policy environment, that could be tweaked to allow climate-smart agriculture to be adopted by more farmers?
Yeah, sure. It is true, if we are going to fight the effects of climate change and still ensure that we are food secure, then adoption is one of the most important discussions that we must have, and farmers are at the center of this kind of adoption things. So there are many ways these kind of adoptions can be done, from a policy perspective to other perspectives like you know, ease of accessibilities of these technologies and all that. So for example, number one, to really ensure that farmers, who are at the center of the whole of this thing, education is very important. Like, we have to make them understand that what is this climate change. You know, sometimes to some farmers it might really seem things so difficult.
Yes.
When you start discussing greenhouse gases, carbon emissions, some of them will just look at you and then ask themselves, what are these guys saying? But if this education can be tailored to these people, and you tell them, look, if you cut a tree, the next time there will be little rain.
Yes.
And you will end up having this kind of drought. Then they will understand and then start practicing these things. On the policy side, they can just ensure that these kind of frameworks are very well implemented. Example is we've had a ban on charcoal and all that, but I tell you, it's still going on, because I'm sure if you go to the market, if I'm serious, I need some charcoal, I will get. Where did it come from? There's a policy, but there's an implementation.
Definitely.
Yeah, so on the policy bit, they just ensure that this, because already there are some certain policies like cutting trees and all that, but the implementation is still a problem. And then so education of farmers, and then too, on technology-wise, we have to make this technology affordable to the farmer and simple. Because there are certain technologies that are also very complex.
Definitely.
Yeah, so it works with certain group of people, and there are farmers who can still adopt, but we're talking about the majority. If it is too complex, then most of the people will not be able to use it. So you find it's a good system, but then it cannot. And then the other thing is also trying to to bring down the cost. And this can also happen from the policy point of view. They can like maybe do some tax exemptions and all that kind of things.
Definitely. Very, very important. So a lot to be done, and it takes all hands on deck. From across policy sector players, farmer empowerment programs, the farmers themselves at the production level, and the whole value chain. We've just touched, I think, the top of the iceberg or the tip of it. But that's all. But thank you very much, Roussos Demis, founder of Demi Farms and also an agricultural tech expert. You're very passionate about agri-tech. Thank you for your time and making time to speak to the Farm Kenya show. That's been our discussion today. Thank you very much for being part of this program. My name is Nokip Kimboy. Bye-bye for now.